Hey y'all, hope you guys are doing pretty super duper. Today we're gonna talk a little bit about the early part of the Roman Republic, and we're just gonna hit some of the major characters or famous characters. This is again going to be very brief and certainly not going to get everybody or everything that's important. There's Once you start getting into the Republic, you get things that are a lot better documented, and things start moving from the more mythological to the more historical. So the early part of the Republic, again, is still um, quite a ways off from written record as far as contemporary written record. So a lot of it is still kind of considered somewhat mythological, but it has more historical leanings, I guess you could say. So we talked the other day. 509 BC is kind of when the Roman Republic was founded after the expulsion of Tarquinius Superbus, who was the last king of Rome. All right, and the Republic was then established, and um, the first two leaders of the Republic were Lucius Junius Brutus, and then Tarquinius Collatinus. And these two men were the consuls, the first two consuls of um, of, of Rome, and consuls were became the highest position in the Roman government. They were kind of like your chief executives for the government, and they held 1 year terms. Um, and they were also oftentimes in charge of leading the legions as well. So they would have a lot of military authority. Um, okay, but there were two of them, so that one could check the other's power, and they also had a very limited time. So it was a 1 year term. So you wouldn't have one person getting control for too long. All right. Now, early on in the Republic, you get a couple rather interesting figures and some stories that I just wanted to kind of share with you. So, that last king of Rome, Tarquinius Superbus, was not actually um, killed at the end of the kingdom. He was exiled. He was driven out. But he tried to retake Rome, retake his kingship, with the help of the Etruscans. And the Etruscans were led by Lars Porsena. Great name, Lars. Lars Porsena was the Etruscan king, and shortly after the Republic was founded, Lars Porsena attacked Rome. And there are a couple figures that kind of come out of this conflict that are good to know about. One of them is a fellow named Horatius Cocles. Horatius Cocles. And Horatius is famous for when the army of Porsena was ready to cross the Tiber to go attack Rome. Um, Horatius Cocles, and with a couple other friends, broke down the bridge, destroyed the bridge that was connecting the two sides of the Tiber. And after he had destroyed the bridge, he then was able to swim over to safety. So he's a kind of an early Republican figure that is very famous during this time. Another kind of fun guy is named Mucius Skywalla. Not Skywalker, Skywalla. And Mucius Skywalla again, this is kind of in that conflict with Lars Porsena. Mucius took a took it on himself to go try to assassinate Lars Porsena, and he was able to sneak into Porsena's camp, and he tried to assassinate him, but unfortunately he killed the wrong guy. He killed his secretary instead of Porsena himself, and that didn't go so well for him. So he gets captured and brought to Porsena, and he tells Lars Porsena that there are 300 other Romans that have taken an oath to come and assassinate Porsena if he is unsuccessful. And to kind of prove just how tough he is and how prove his resolve, Mucius sticks his right hand, into a fire that's nearby, and just burns his hand off, just to show how tough he is. And Porsena is very impressed by his bravery, and actually lets him go, and he ends the siege of Rome that he was doing. And Mucius Scaevola is actually a name that was added to Mucius after the fact, and Scaevola means left-handed, because he burned his right hand off, so he wouldn't be called Mucius right-handed, he'd be called Mucius left-handed. Another one, this was a lady that gained some renown. One of the when Porsena and the Romans kind of broke off their hostilities, they had a treaty. One of the common things in ancient warfare to kind of signify peace and everything is the giving of hostages. Okay, so you would give some usually kind of high-standing individuals. Or children of high-standing individuals into the hand of your former enemy. And a lot of this would be kind of to ensure good behavior, all right? So that, you wouldn't go break off your part of the deal, because if you did, your enemy would then harm your hostages, the people that are dear to you. So the exchange of hostages was a very kind of common thing. And one of the hostages was a woman named Claudia, and Claudia managed to escape from Lars Porsena, and she led a band of other ladies along with her, and they were able to escape and flee across the Tiber and get back to Rome. Porsena, of course, was not happy about this. He demanded her to be returned. The Romans agreed because she was, given as a hostage. But Porsena, when Claudia came back, Porsena was so impressed by her bravery that he said that she could, free half of the hostages that he had. So she chose a couple of the young men that he had hostage, so that they could continue on the fighting if necessary. So she is a greatly honored and respected Roman lady of this time period as well. And they built they even made a statue of her on a horse, which was considered a great honor. All right. Another figure, this is probably about 50 years later or so, that is famous, is a fellow named Cincinnatus. And Cincinnatus is famous. This was during a conflict the Romans had with a tribe known as the Aequi. And two of the consuls at the time were off fighting, and one of the consuls was besieged, and the other consul was not available to help him out. So the Romans were really kind of freaking out because one of their armies with a consul there was besieged, and quite possibly was about to be, utterly humiliated. So they named someone dictator. All right. Now the term dictator, this individual gets absolute power for a period of time, usually about 6 months, and the dictator. The reason they have absolute power is so that you don't have to worry about bureaucracy and sending things through the proper channels. You can make quick decisions right away. So they named Cincinnatus a dictator, and Cincinnatus was at the time fairly poor. He was out working his farm, and he was named dictator. He assembled his forces and then went and raised the siege of his consul. And after he had taken care of the situation, he resigned his dictatorship. He was only dictator for 15 days. And he returned to his plow and continued his simple life of farming. And he's a really important figure because he represents not holding on to power when you have it. So just using the power for good and not hanging on to it. Also, he's important because he really shows the Romans, especially at this time period, were very agricultural people, very very tied to the land, and there's a lot of kind of respect, I suppose, shown to this kind of rustic rural life. So that's kind of one thing you can see with Cincinnatus, just how the Romans were very kind of agricultural people, and the importance of that and how that was, necessary and honored. Okay, in about probably, let's see here, 60, 70 years later, 390 BC, there is another kind of important event. Again, I'm skipping over a lot of stuff here, but 390 BC, the Gauls, which are, in Gaul is modern day France, so it's a good ways north of Rome, and there were several different Gallic tribes that not necessarily in France, but the Gauls attacked Rome and actually sacked the city, and they were led by a fellow named Brennus, and the Romans, obviously this was a great defeat, and the Romans were defeated at a brook nearby, the Alia River. And the Romans were able to send word to a fellow named Camillus, and he was able to return, and he had recently defeated some other local tribes and was able to drive the Gauls back out of Rome, and he there are a couple famous lines in this. The Gauls, part of the reason they had to withdraw, they had some sickness break out, and so they took a lot of money from the Romans, and one thing that this Gallic leader does, they're weighing out 1,000 pounds of or talents of gold, I forget what. Is there pounds or talents? I remember, but and he adds his sword to the scales so that the Romans would have to pay more, and they complain about it. And you get a famous phrase here, "Vae victis," which means "woe to the conquered." So he's basically saying, if you've been beaten, you don't have any way to complain. You have no recourse. So just basically suck it up and pay the debt. But when Camillus comes in, he's able to pay off the Gauls, but also drive them away, and get them out of the city. Actually, I'm not sure if he even pays them off. He might just drive them off. Anyway, he gets them out. And Camillus is named a second founder of Rome. They're called father of the fatherland. He's called like a second Romulus, because after Rome has been sacked, he restores it, brings it back. And then the last kind of individual I want to talk about briefly, this is in so this is over 100 years later, 280 to 275, we get the fellow named Pyrrhus. Now, Pyrrhus was a king of Epirus, which was kind of north of Greece, and he came over and attacked the Romans after a local, an Italian city asked for his help. He came over, attacked the Romans, and he fought several different battles with them, and quite a few of the battles he was actually fairly successful in that he technically won, but he eventually kind of depleted his forces, and he lost so many men that even though he technically won the battle, it ended up being too costly for him to sustain. And he eventually, after 5-6 years, he eventually had to abandon his fighting there. And he also brought war elephants into Italy. So Hannibal was not the first. Pyrrhus also brought war elephants. But also from Pyrrhus, we get a kind of famous phrase, a Pyrrhic victory. That may be a term you hear every now and again. A Pyrrhic victory is a victory that is won at too high of a cost. Okay, so it's basically the whole winning the battle but losing the war sort of thing. It's a similar to that idea as well. All right, so he's a famous character. Okay, so once again, just very, very quick overview of some important people during this early Republican time. Next go around, we'll look at some of the Punic Wars with Carthage. So hope you guys are doing swell and dandy. Let me know if you have any questions or anything. And I love you guys, and I'll talk to you later.